the flourishing of a bunch of other individual.
Could he then eat that deer?
Interesting. If you're, well, yeah, I don't know. You know, can you kill a deer at all? Because you're instrumentalizing that deer. It's just a question somebody asked me about. Who was it that asked me about capital punishment? You're not here today, are you? She's not here today. See, remember that young, our community member who asked me about my views on capital punishment? And there is sort of this Kantian deontological social self-defense argument that some Kantians claim to be making, that and they have to rely on the idea that capital punishment has a deterrent value. And so every time we publicly, not on TV or anything, but every time we execute, every time the state executes a murderer, the state, according to this argument, defends 10 innocent third parties, because not only are we eliminating the murderer, right? We could incarcerate him too, but who knows, he might kill somebody else in prison too, so we might be saving somebody else there. But we're definitely also, right, if we believe in deterrence, then we're saving a bunch of other people. And so if we're saving a lot of human beings by executing one human being, then perhaps a Kantian would, say that's a way you're defending humanity, you're promoting humanity, right? Of course, that's a very, very difficult argument to maintain, because it really depends on this idea that deterrence actually works, that killing people actually makes other people think twice. And a lot of research indicates that doesn't work that way at all. But why did I get off on that capital punishment subject?
Because if you kill the deer herd, you're doing something good for the deer, the environment, but
yes.
you're still killing the deer. So is it you're doing good for the biological whole, or are you to kill the deer, but you're still killing deer?
Yeah, and presumably, and maybe doing good for the biological whole is good for more individuals. And therefore, but remember, Regan is an individualistic thinker, right? So he has to be assured that a greater number of subjects of lives, of animals who are subjects of lives, are going to be saved, and their flourishing promoted by culling the deer herd. So I guess it's possible for Tom Regan. But in general, right, if you kill a deer, what are you doing? I mean, whatever you're doing it for, this goes back to that capital punishment thing. You're instrumentalized, right? When the state kills somebody, the state is instrumentalizing that person. And it doesn't really matter what reason you're doing it for. If you're doing it for self-defense, then you're promoting somebody's humanity, right? In the same way that Kant would have no problem if a gangster walks in here with a gun right now, would have no problem with one of us pulling out a gun and killing the gangster, right? Because we're promoting our humanity. We're defending ourselves, right? So we're promoting our humanity. But if the gangster, once the gangster has been incarcerated, he's been incapacitated, we no longer have to kill him to defend ourselves, right? And so we're not promoting anybody's humanity by killing him. And likewise, with the deer, I guess with the deer we are promoting the deerness. We're promoting the deerness of the other deer. So maybe Regan would be on board with some hunting, but the point is that on the face of it, hunting is morally wrong, right? Because you're exterminating a center of moral status, a being that has moral status. Anyway, these are all very interesting considerations, I suppose. All right, where are we now? So there are a lot of commonly cited reasons to justify unequal treatment of living beings. Why might some kinds of individuals be thought of as having greater moral status in themselves than other kinds? And here's a list of reasons that I came up with for claiming, for example, that humans have more moral status than bears. Plain old custom and convention. Religious reasons, also really just part of custom and convention. Capacity for language, capacity for higher thought. And the farther down we go, the more inclusive our moral system is going to be, right? The more non-human beings it's going to include. A wider range of non-human beings the farther we go down, right? Capacity for self-awareness is Regan's criterion, right? An animal individual. He likes to use the word inherent value, so I should have changed that. But We can use those words interchangeably. If it is a subject of a life, okay? And then these are the characteristics that Regan identifies for us. This is how we determine whether or not a particular animal is a subject of a life. And you can recognize all of these as being very well developed in human beings and other advanced mammals. But all of these are also present in all mammals, and as far as I can tell, in almost all birds, maybe all birds. All right. And then when we get down to the very bottom, we can see that, the category of beings with moral status is expanded out as far as it could possibly go. Well, maybe it could go even farther. Maybe non-living beings have moral status too. That's actually what the author will read next week. That's what Tom Birch argues, that all beings have moral status. Anyway. All right. So Regan could be offering us this very stringent argument against using animals in all but extremely rare circumstances. Regan seems to be, he's arguing that it's fundamentally morally wrong to reduce an animal who is the subject of a life to instrumental status. He has these two principles which we can think of as analogous to the principles that Collicutt identified in the land ethic. These second order principles, right? Principles like Collicutt's second order principles and Regan's worse off principle and mini-ride principle are examples of mediation. Principles that mediate, right? What should land managers do? What should resource managers do when human vital needs conflict with non-human vital needs? All right? That's where Regan pulls out his worse off principle, for example, and he uses it to solve the quandary that we might find ourselves in when, for example, we consider whether or not a human can instrumentalize a chimpanzee to save his own life by taking the chimpanzee's heart, for example. In that instance, Regan's worse off principle seems to direct us toward approving of the transplant, because the death of a human is going to make that human and that human's loved ones worse off than the death of the chimpanzee. Okay? So Regan does seem, this less stringent reading of Regan says that humans are entitled to instrumentalize animals who are subjects of lives if doing so is necessary to save human lives. All right? But obviously this is still a very strong principle because it rules out so much of what humans do to non-human animals. Obviously the dolphin slaughter in Japan, just so far beyond the pale, it's ridiculous from a Regan point of view, right? Remember, dolphins are way up there in class 4, maybe even class 5, right? So they're a special case, and even just killing one is a subject of outrage from Regan's point of view. From Collicutt's point of view, it's not, right? Killing one dolphin is not the subject of outrage, right? Maybe killing 50 or 100 dolphins because you're taking out so many apex predators from the marine ecosystem, right? From Collicutt's and the land ethic point of view. But from Regan's point of view, just killing one is an outrage. Unless it's done for vital human needs, all right? If humans in Japan really did vitally depend on dolphin killing, let's say something wiped out all their other food sources, right? Some bizarre situation, then dolphin killing would be okay, even from this less stringent reading of Regan, all right? This is a completely different argument than the one that we learned about from Leopold, Collicutt, Partridge, and Stone, all right? Remember, from the land ethics point of view, the Taiji Cove dolphin slaughter is land ethically wrong on communitarian grounds because in removing so many apex predators, it disrupts the biotic community's capacity to renew itself, all right? And then again, it's only morally acceptable for Collicutt if vital human needs are at stake. The Taiji Cove dolphin slaughter is also wrong, of course, on deontological grounds. This is probably a much stronger argument too, right? Because each dolphin is the subject of a life and is therefore a rights bearer. Dolphin slaughter might be morally acceptable under Regan's worse off and mini-ride principles only in very rare situations where vital human needs are at stake. All right, so that's kind of duplicative, I think. All right, so maybe we could talk about these two examples now that I've referred to already, the chimpanzee heart transplant example and the lifeboat example. And then the next page of notes, I go into these two different interpretations, and I'm still not sure. I should just send an email to Professor Regan and ask him what exactly he means. Maybe if I read it again real carefully, I could figure it out. But I'm not sure if he's arguing that, that for example, harvesting the chimpanzee's heart is morally impermissible. If the human's vital needs are at stake, maybe what he's saying is that, yes, in that instance, it's okay to harvest the chimpanzee's heart. But I don't know. I mean, we could change the example a little bit, just add some more facts. Like, what if this guy, this human being who needs the heart from the chimpanzee, his heart disease is not the result of a genetic, it's the result of his lifestyle choices completely. Totally his lifestyle choices. He's a lifelong smoker. He's obese. He eats at McDonald's all the time, and now he needs a new heart because he's just mistreated himself so badly for the last 30 years. That anyway, does that change? Does that change the situation? I don't know. Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. Does that make it less objectionable or more? It probably makes it more objectionable, right? Still might not be totally wrong, but it's certainly we're going to be more suspicious. If this human that he wants to kill this chimpanzee, but he's the one to blame for all of his heart problems, right? Whereas if he's just innocent and he just had some genetic defect, maybe the transplant is more acceptable then. I don't know. But Regan might be arguing that because letting the man die from his congenital heart disease, letting the man die does not involve instrumentalizing him at all. Whereas killing the chimpanzee, there's some clear instrumentalization going on there. So Regan might be making the much more stringent argument that, no, sorry, Charlie, you're just another animal. You're another animal with rights. And just like those sailors did not have the right to harvest their fellow crewmen, right? Even though they were starving and dying of thirst, they didn't have the right to do that. So too, rights are rights, damn it. You can't harvest that chimpanzee's heart. Unless you're in this very unusual situation like the lifeboat example. Okay?
Aren't you using two normative examples of rightness? Isn't the one you can't harvest his heart because it's legally not right? But to not harvest the chimpanzee is because it's morally not right?
Well, we always want to stick right now with just moral.
Just morals? Okay.
Moral status, yeah. I'm just inviting all of you to think about what exactly, what is Regan trying to say here, and exactly how strong of an argument is he making here? If in the end humans can still justify killing non-human beings that are subjects of lives, that's not. If that's what Regan's arguing, then that's not a very strong argument, isn't it? I mean, there are lots of instances. It's still going to eliminate, and it is a strong argument. I'm sorry. I mean, obviously, you can't eat meat, right? From Singer's point of view, from Regan's point of view, from the utilitarian standpoint, from the deontological standpoint. Actually, interestingly enough, Singer, if you accept utilitarianism and it just say, if you accept the moral status of class 2 beings like Singer does, then you're going to be even more strict in your dietary requirements than Regan, because at least Regan can still eat fish, right? And he can eat some reptiles, right? Some snakes, right? I can mention snakes because Nora left the room. She's scared of snakes. I checked real quick. Oh, she had to go out for a minute. Anyway. I thought about showing the honey badger video, but I can't show it because it shows the honey badger eating a snake, one of those cobras. I like that honey badger video, though. Anyway, I used to show it for my class, but not anymore. Anyway, obviously we can't show it now because Nora might see it and then she'd get scared. I'm very sensitive to that. I know, I won't show anything with gruesome, people mistreating animals either. I can't stand that myself. Maybe I'm putting my head in the sand. I don't know. I know these things happen all the time, but Anyway, so what's interesting is that it seems as though Regan can justify eating some meat, right, if it's just meat from the ocean, right? Whereas Singer is going to say, no, you can't eat that octopus, you can't eat that fish, because those fish are exhibiting pain when they get a hook in their mouth, right? So clearly they're sentient, and that means they have moral status. So while Regan's argument arguably metaphysically is sturdier, is philosophically a stronger argument, it also focuses on a narrow range of beings. It includes a narrower range of beings than Singer's argument does. Okay, so Tom Regan gives us this lifeboat example. Did we cover enough of that? Yeah. All right. Where, and he's using this argument to explain why throwing the dog overboard is the right thing to do. And it's his way of responding to people who accuse him of just being such an extreme animal rights person that he doesn't even distinguish between a healthy adult human being and a healthy adult dog. All right? He says, no, I do distinguish. If I'm faced with a situation where I have to instrumentalize one or the other, then because the human is going to be worse off by death, by being thrown overboard, my principle allows me, it tells me that I need to throw the dog overboard, okay? Because the dog is, the death of the dog matters a lot less to the dog and the dog's loved ones than the death of the human, okay? Obviously, Collicutt would seem to agree, throw the dog overboard. And then we could throw out some tantalizing other thought experiment questions, though. What if the dog is just not any ordinary dog, but the last thylacine, right? What if it's the pregnant thylacine? All right. Watch out for the pregnant thylacine questions on the final exam, right? And all of a sudden, now I'm thinking about this. All right. Not as interesting as the marsupial human thesis that I was dwelling on a couple years ago. Did you guys read about this? Evidently, they found in the fossil record of Australia, they found an ape, what appears to be a primate, who was a marsupial primate. So the idea is that, you know, if evolution had gone on long enough in Australia without other interferences, then perhaps they would have evolved a marsupial human. Wouldn't that be cool? I don't know. Pregnancies are easier for marsupials. But they'd have pouches and there'd be whole fashion shows. So anybody who wants to put together a marsupial human fashion show, you'll get extra credit. I'm serious, that'd be fun. You have special salve to keep your pouch nice and soft. Anyway. All right. I think of bizarre things sometimes, don't I? It's fascinating, though, to think of a marsupial primate. Evidently, it's almost has like Bigfoot status in some places in Australia. They think they see them. You know, they're still alive. They're like Bigfoot that are hiding. They're highly cryptozoic, these marsupial humans. Anyway, so is it morally permissible to harvest the heart of a chimp to save the life of a human with severe heart disease? Regan might argue that it is okay to do this because the human's vital interests trump the chimp's vital interests. As I said, humans lose more in death than chimps. Regan might argue, on the other hand, that it is not okay to do this because killing the chimp for humans entails completely instrumentalizing the chimp, whereas refusing to kill the chimp does not entail instrumentalizing the human. All right? So, if do not instrumentalize a sentient animal, or a self-aware animal, I should have changed that. If that is our guiding moral norm, then the evil of instrumentalizing the chimp is greater than the evil of allowing the human to perish. The human is, okay, and the key point here is that the human, by allowing the human to die from heart disease, nobody's instrumentalizing him. As far as I can tell, right? I mean, you're not doing that. Nobody's doing that. That's just what's happening to the human. What would Collicutt say about harvesting the chimp heart? Well, Collicutt might be okay with it, actually. Interesting, huh? Unless, you know, he jumps over, he might have his own views on animal rights, but from what we know about Collicutt's ethic, you know, he's a land ethicist. And he would ask whether or not harvesting that chimp, probably that chimp is going to come from a lab, is probably going to be the chimp, you know, that grew up in a laboratory. It's not going to be taken out of the wild. So probably Collicutt would have nothing to say about it. He'd just say, well, that's okay, I guess. Does it disrupt the chimp communities at a pace or on a scale that exceed the normal pace and scale of chimp communities? Probably not. So from a land ethic point of view, there's probably nothing wrong with harvesting a chimp for a human. All right, so interpretation 1 is the more permissive interpretation of what Regan is arguing. And that is that on the face of it, it's morally wrong to reduce any animal who is the subject of a life to fully instrumental status. All right? Reducing an animal to instrumental status, treating it as mere property, is permissible, however, when done for vital human needs. All right? Humans rarely need to reduce an animal to instrumental status, so such reduction is wrong in nearly all instances. Okay? The dolphin slaughter, totally wrong, right? If vital human needs really are at stake, however, then humans are permitted to treat non-human animals as mere property. Okay, and again, if they really did need to do that, because somehow all their other food disappeared, then that would be okay for Regan. And now, this is the example that I've introduced already. A chimp to human heart transplant, which necessarily involves killing the chimp, is morally permissible as long as the human's life is vitally dependent on using the chimp's heart. Okay? Is that what we want to say about harvesting Kevin's genetic material? Harvest of Kevin's killing, euthanizing, the euthanization of Kevin and the use of his genetic material to cure the fatal illnesses of 1,000 people is morally permissible. Do we say that? Or do we say that harvesting Kevin's life is morally permissible as long as we do it to benefit to save the lives of 1,000 other people? Do we say that? No, we don't say that, do we? But we do say that about chimps, don't we? A chimp to human heart transplant is morally permissible as long as a human life is vitally dependent on using the chimp's heart. Most people, right? If you disagree with that, you're some kind of just marginalized, right? You're totally marginalized. You're ostracized, right? If you were in high school, you'd wear the wrong sneakers, right? And yet that seems to be what one implication, perhaps, of this is the more stringent interpretation. Okay, same terms as above. Is prima facie morally wrong to reduce an animal who is the subject of a life to fully instrumental status? Okay, totally wrong. Same as interpretation number 1. And it's totally wrong unless it's done for vital human needs. Okay? And, all right, one further condition, and when the only alternative to reducing that animal to instrumental status involves reducing a human to instrumental status. And that's the lifeboat example, right? But it's not the chimp to human example. In the lifeboat, it is morally permissible, actually morally obligatory. You're obligated to make this choice, to throw the dog overboard. It is morally permissible to instrumentalize a non-human animal if the only alternative is to instrumentalize a human. All right? The goal of removing one of the animals from the lifeboat is to make the lifeboat viable, right? That's the goal. And so throwing the animal over is reducing the animal completely to achieve that goal. And that's going to be morally wrong if it's another human being, right? Is it morally wrong if it's a chimpanzee? Yes, Regan says, because you have no choice. You have to instrumentalize one or the other, right? But that's a very rare situation. All right. So I've already been over this, but they would both conclude, but for very, very different reasons, that the Taiji dolphin slaughter is morally wrong. Collicutt would conclude that it's morally wrong for land ethics reasons. It's land ethically wrong because it disturbs marine communities and ecosystems too rapidly at too large of a scale, right? So they lose their capacities for self-repair and self-renewal. Regan doesn't need to rely on any kind of consequentialist reasoning, right? Regan does not need to wait and see whether or not removing all those apex predators is going to have a bad consequence for the community. He doesn't need to wait and see. He knows it's morally wrong right off the bat because he knows that dolphins are subjects of lives. They have all these characteristics, right? In abundance. They even have this last one, interspecies altruism. They seem to have some of it. But all these other ones, they have almost as much as we do. So, killing just one of them is going to be morally wrong. Unless it's done in a very rare situation like on a lifeboat. All right? Okay. Well, so what else did I have to do today? I forget what.
Spin your thought experiment on the Kevin thing. Because what if Kevin's the last guy on the planet? Not the last guy on the planet, but can save the planet from like a pandemic. Like, would it still be morally permissible to harvest his body if it's going to save every single person?
Well, you'll recall that one of the initial terms, when I first presented this thought experiment to this class, I included the term that is even more futuristic, that somehow cognitive scientists have already, some kind of very sophisticated scientists have already determined that Kevin is not going to make any lasting, significant, important contributions to future human society. And that seems a little bit demeaning, and I was hesitant to. That's why I always choose somebody who looks like he's got a thick skin. Right, so yeah, that was one of the original terms of the thought experiment. But perhaps then, yes, we might ask, well, who is this getting a heart transplant? Is it a brilliant musician who is
Going to say they're already, or
making contributions to humanity? Or is it just some, somebody who just watches TV all day? And does it matter? Yeah. Yeah.
If I'm not going to provide anything in the future, wouldn't it be acceptable to kill me for my genetic material for the 1,000 people? If in the future, like these 1,000 people will die, but I won't produce anything, wouldn't it then be acceptable?
On a consequentialist, in a consequentialist framework, certainly. Yeah. And then, on the other hand, if it was determined that you have characteristics which will lead you to make very important contributions to art or to science or technology or cure for cancer or something like that, then perhaps which is why perhaps we shouldn't get our government involved in this kind of business. Deciding who has moral status, who is morally more valuable. We're not supposed to be doing that, right? We're supposed to live in a country where people are treated equally, and yet there's a great deal of unequal treatment, obviously, in our society. All right, so what do you guys want to talk about now? We could start getting into Rolston a little bit. And then we could talk more about specific...
I got another question here about dolphins.
Yes.
So I totally am 100% down that it's morally impermissible to kill dolphins, especially in the volume that they're doing it. But is it not also morally impermissible for us to tell someone else how to behave culturally?
It's rude. It could come across as rude and offensive. Yeah. You put me in Taiji when they're doing that, I'll be rude and offensive. I'll be very rude. I'll grab those people who are in the scuba gear, stabbing those poor, not scuba gear, but wetsuits, right? They stab them in the base of their spine because they don't want to kill them. They want to paralyze them, so that they can just hoist them in the boat and send them off to the market. Right? They're not going to kill them till they get to the market, slaughter them for sushi or whatnot. But I'm going to interfere with those persons' liberties, and I'm going to grab them and wrestle them and stop them from, right? So I'm going to be very offensive if you put me over there. Likewise, I'm going to be very offensive, in some countries where they're incarcerating people for having a homoerotic relationship, right? That's very rude too, isn't it? To tell people in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia, that they should not allow Abdul and Muhammad to get married, or that they should force them, right? That's very offensive, right? And yet, if we want to make deontological arguments, we are committing ourselves to a universal point of view, yes. That there are universal laws which pertain to our treatment of ecological wholes and to our treatment of beings that have enough awareness to be kind of the subjects of their own lives, to be the heroes in their own dramas, right? So yeah, now it's not good to be rude, and there's something virtuous in a cultural relativistic outlook, right? Because you're acknowledging that your moral laws are constrained by your culture, and there's a humility in that, right? It's good to be humble, to do in Rome what the Romans do, to pay attention to what other people are doing and to kind of try to respect them, right? But at the same time, you know, if their cultural practices are somehow just, can I use the term, just beyond the pale, then should we sit back when the people in Thailand are abusing their elephants? It just sickens me. Oh, I can't even think about people hurting an elephant. And I'm going to be very offensive there too. You know, I'm going to grab that person. Stop beating that elephant. Stop prodding that elephant with this electric thing. You know, they're giving them shocks. That's disgusting. Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry. You've been having your hand up for a long time. Yes.
I'm totally on the same page with you. I agree. But building off of that, couldn't those cultures then turn around and tell us that, I mean, they might be doing the same practices, but the rate at which we're killing farmed animals would be the same, doing as much damage as they're doing to dolphins
Yeah.
or other species that for their food or whatever.
Yes, we would be grossly hypocritical at many levels probably if we were to start, obviously. But, you know, I mean, somebody said hypocrisy is the homage that vice pays to virtue. And at least, you know, if you're recognizing, you know, if you're behaving hypocritically and you're recognizing it, that at least, you know, you're recognizing that there is a moral aspiration, you know, that you're missing. You're missing. You're not aspiring. You're not actually being the person, or your society isn't living by its own code. But that doesn't mean that code is wrong, right? We have a lot, obviously. Spectacles of Americans and their sense of entitlement and their sense of exceptionalism are disgusting and horrific to think that, you know, some Americans think they're entitled to just anything, right? And that's just a reality, but yeah, you know, I mean, what you find is that when you take an ethics class, you'll find, and I mentioned this the very first day of class, if we were to put, I don't think these pens work, oh look, that one works now, but if we were to put moral absolutism and then moral relativism at the other end, and we're exploring a whole spectrum in between the moral relativistic point of view and the moral absolutist point of view. You know, but I mean, total relativism is the view that moral truth is entirely determined by culture. So what's morally right in another country is going to be very different than what's morally right in our country. And not only that, but there is no reliable way to adjudicate between